It's the best performing tank worldwide. 72 kilometers per hour speed and a shooting range of 500 kilometers. Yes, I'm talking about the Leopard 2 tanks. After a lot of back and forth, Germany has finally given the go-ahead for Ukraine to have these tanks. It's being touted as a game changer by the West. But will it really change the course of the war? Before I answer that, let me show you some visuals. Russia started its invasion from the Eastern Front, but within 2 months, Vladimir Putin wanted the big cheese, the capital city of Kiev. But something unexpected happened. The Russian tanks were stuck on the streets. Columns of trucks and armored vehicles could not move on the paved roads without much choice. The Russians had to abandon and retreat. So why am I telling you this today? Well, winter is ending. Snow will begin to melt soon. And German tanks are soon going to start rolling in. Everyone is aware about this mud season, especially Russia. After all, this mud is what slowed down Hitler's invasion during the Second World War. They call it a time when roads stop existing. Mud can make Ukraine's terrain virtually impassable. President Volodymyr Zelensky has thanked Germany and NATO members. An urgent supply of Leopard 2 can be expected soon. But April is just a couple of months away. Even if the tanks reach Ukraine somehow and the soldiers are trained to use them, how is the country planning to operate on Ukrainian soil? Amid all this, Russia has already warned of escalation, something that has been complementary with every Western package. But let me tell you why it is different this time. Russia's ambassador to Germany has said the move will take the conflict to a whole new level. So what can we expect next? Well, let's understand from the arsenal point of view. Since we're talking about tanks, Russia has been mostly using T-90. It's a third-generation Russian main battle tank. It has stood out to be an important weapon for Moscow. The country has used this in the 2014 Ukraine conflict, then in Syria, also in Azerbaijan. But there is a lot more in Russia's arsenal that is not currently in use. Moscow calls them super weapons, like RS-28 Sarmat. It's an intercontinental ballistic missile. Then there is a Vanguard missile system. Russia also has Poseidon. It's an unmanned underwater vehicle armed with nuclear weapons. Kinzhal is also part of Moscow's arsenal. It's an air-launched ballistic missile. These are all deadly weapons that could potentially bring Ukraine to the ground. It all depends on Putin's game plan now. He hasn't used these so far. But will the Leopard 2 tanks provoke the Russian president? That remains to be seen. At the German parliament, Olaf Scholz was asked why sending these tanks is no longer a provocation. And we have a similar question. What made the West change its stance? Scholz avoided the question, but sending Leopard 2 tanks was being seen as overthrowing the principles of post-war German politics. So is this the West's way to force Russia back to the negotiating table? Or is the West going all out in this war? For more on this, let's now go across to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He joins us from Virginia in the United States. He's a senior fellow and military expert. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION once again. Now, Kiev is certainly happy and has welcomed this move. The Western allies are elated. How could the Leopard tanks, in your opinion, change the tide of the Russia-Ukraine war? Is it really a game changer as it's being touted?
Well, I think the first thing we need to understand is, how combat actually works, how building combat power works, because unfortunately, up to this point, there has been an equating the presence of NATO tanks with the presence of NATO tank power. And those are very different things. They are not synonymous. In order to build combat power, you have to have well-trained crews, you have to have well-trained units, and you have to have a logistics system and a maintenance system. All these are necessary in place and ready to go when it's time to employ them. If you miss any of those main components, then you make the capability much less powerful and potentially no change at all. And that's one of the things I want to reinforce, is that it depends entirely upon how effective Ukraine can employ these things in the midst of their other equipment, with all of their other logistics issues, in some kind of concerted, coordinated fashion. And it's uncertain right now that can be done in a game-changing way, despite what anybody wants.
All right. Now, Moscow has issued a statement saying these Western heavy tanks will be destroyed on the battlefield. Is that an assessment you would agree with, or is that mere bravado? Also, is this likely to be seen as a grave provocation by the Kremlin?
Yeah, look, the truth is the Challenger tanks, the Leopards, the M1 Abrams, the Leclercs, these are all top quality tanks. There's no question. They are genuinely good. But unless they're used in the way that I've talked about here, then the issue is that they're not magic tanks. Let me just put it that way. They're not impervious. They can be destroyed like any other tank on the battlefield. And if Russia comes in, and especially if they use these T-90s and some of their advanced T-72s and their anti-tank guided missiles, their artillery, some of their rockets, I assure you, these things can be destroyed. And if people think that these things are impervious to Russian armor, I think they're going to be in for a bad mistake. Let me answer your question about the provocation issue. Russia has been saying that really everything is a red line to be crossed. And so far, we keep pushing the boundary on that. And, we haven't seen a result, so we push to the next so-called red line. The question is, we don't know when Russia may really come to a red line. And by perpetually pushing, we believe that there will never be a crossed red line and never be a response. And right now, it's still uncertain. There may not be a response here either, but it may come as well, and in a way we don't like.
Absolutely. So let me ask you these two questions before we let you go. The Leopard 2 tanks could provide a major boost for Kiev's forces as they fight back against the Russian troops. But do you think the Ukrainians could be trained quickly enough to use these tanks and to maintain them? That's question number one. Question number two, of course, Moscow calls almost everything a grave provocation. But could this really take the conflicts to the next level? And if that be the case, could we actually see a situation where Russia decides to go ahead and use what it calls its super weapons, weapons that haven't been deployed in this war thus far?
Yeah, I can give you a direct experience on the first one. I fought in an armored battle, in a tank battle, the Battle of 7th Easting in Iraq in 1991, and I was the second in command of an armored cavalry squadron for 1st Armored Division in the mid-2000s in Germany. So I have a lot of direct experience in how long it takes to prepare a unit for combat. And I'm telling you, for the United States Army, we have some of the best troops in the world. We would need about a year, or at the very lowest 6 months of existing units before we would be ready to go into combat. The idea that we're going to now throw Ukraine, who's in the middle of fighting a fight to their very existence as a country, especially in the Donbass meat grinder area, and then they're going to simultaneously prepare for this. I just don't see any chance within 6 to 9 months at the earliest to have a genuine shot at having success on the battlefield. So anything they rush before that is really going to be rushing to failure, as we say in the U.S. Army, and I hope they don't try that. And then the last point, your question about the advance or escalation on the Moscow's part to super weapons, I don't think that they're going to use those unless their conventional forces are unable to defeat the U.S. I'm sorry, unable to defeat all the Western supplies. I think right now Putin thinks. I think that he may think his forces are capable of defeating this armor, especially if they don't train up before they use it. And he would definitely prefer to keep it conventional. But we have to always understand that if this ever starts to succeed from the West and Russia actually starts to get driven back, then the chances of that go through the roof. And if you even think about threatening Crimea militarily, then I think that the chances are high and probable that nuclear weapons or other these things are used. And that's the real dilemma that we face.
That is the real dilemma. So, well, could we see a serious escalation of the conflict with the deployment of these Leopard 2 tanks? Or could it, in fact, work as a strategy to bring Russia back to the negotiating table? I know that's asking for too much at this stage, but hope springs eternal. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thanks for speaking to WION.
Thank you very much.